Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime video. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing Wade Wilson, the serial strangler. But before we get started, if you've not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. All right, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that is pretty new, or at least the resolution is recent. The murders actually took place in 2019, but as of this month that I'm filming this week actually, June of 2024, we have had a trial, and that's what I was waiting for. I was waiting for a trial. I was waiting for a verdict. I wanted to learn as much as I could about the women in this case that Wade killed and about Wade himself and what an absolute monster he is, because there's a lot to it. There's a lot that I learned, and I wanted to have all of this picture painted as perfectly as possible. That's a lot of P's, but I did so that I could tell you about it because, wow, what a horrifying piece of shit. So today, I'm going to tell you that entire story. I read all the things, I watched all the things, all the trial footage, so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I'm going to ask you the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kick around in your brain as we go through the details. But of course, I want you to answer once we have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Do you think if Wade Wilson had not been arrested when he was, he would have gone on to kill more women? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murders of Kristine Melton and Diane Ruiz at the hands of Wade Wilson. So our story today is going to begin midday on October 7th, 2019. And this is in Hancock Bridge Parkway, which is in Florida. It was on this day that a guy named Joshua, who owned a business called Mateo's Graphics, it was like a screen printing business where they made shirts and signs, things like this. Joshua, he's at work, doing work as one does when they are at work, when some guy that he knew, he didn't know him super well, they were acquaintances, came into his business. And this was a guy named Wade Wilson. And he was in quite a state. He was very frantic. He was pacing back and forth. And he was telling Joshua, I'm sure he goes by Josh, I don't know. He was telling him, like, I need your help. I need to get out of town. I need money. I need a plane ticket. I need a bus ticket. I need something. Now, Joshua says at first he didn't believe him. He didn't understand that this was an actual serious situation because he hadn't taken in the whole scene. But as he took a step back mentally and looked Wade over, he started to think this was more serious because Wade was wearing just a pair of sweatpants, no shirt, no shoes. He was bloody. He was missing a couple of teeth. And it was at this point that Josh was like, oh, I think that he might be serious. He said at this point, Wade told him, I killed some people. And that's why I need to get out of town. So Joshua hears this, and he is reasonably scared because he is alone in this business with a guy he knows, but not like knows, just sort of knows. And this guy's telling him that he had killed people. He doesn't know why he's coming to him with this information, but he's not feeling super secure about it. So he tells him, like, okay, listen, I'm going to give you a cigarette, and here's what I got to do. I actually have to run an errand real quick. I was going to say coworker, employee, which I guess could still be a coworker. I need to go pick them up. So I'm going to go do that. I'm going to be right back. So you just hang tight and we'll keep discussing this whole you killed people and you need to get away thing. But here's the thing. Josh was lying. He left and he's like, you know what I'm going to do instead? I'm going to go to one of my other buildings. I guess he owned many buildings. Good for him. And call the cops and tell them exactly what just happened. So he does just that. And the cops go to Mateo Graphics where Wade was to search for him, but they're unable to find him. So they actually get Josh to come back to the property because since he owned it, he knew like all the areas. I guess it was like a big lot. There are a lot of places that he could have hid. So they brought him back so he could help search for him and see if maybe he was still there. But he was not. Wade Wilson was in the wind. Now, even though Wade was missing, that didn't mean that they had nothing, because in the parking lot was the car that Wade had driven up in, which I believe was a black Nissan. I guess when Wade left, he just decided not to take the car. So they look through the windows and they see what appears to be blood. So worrying that something was wrong, worrying that the person who owned this car might be in the trunk because, spoiler alert, this car did not belong to Wade. They had probable cause at this point to go into the car to see if anyone was in danger, but it turned out that nobody was. I would say thankfully, but the blood's there for a reason. The person's just not in the car right now. So even though that wasn't totally successful in that moment in figuring out what was going on, they were able to run the plates on this car to see who it belonged to. And they saw that this car belonged to a 35-year-old woman named Kristine Melton. And she was one of 2 women who Wade Wilson had murdered that very morning. Now, before we get into everything that happened here, I first want to talk about Diane. I want to talk about Kristine because they are the most important people in this case. And they are 2 totally innocent women that were killed by this man for no reason. And then I'll get into talking about Wade and talking about what a walking red flag this human being was, his violent past, and what happened here. Now, where do I even begin with talking about these 2 women? It's honestly hard to say because there hasn't been a ton of media coverage on who they were as people, right? There hasn't been a lot of interviews with family members. But what I can tell you, what I think I will begin with, is what the prosecutor said when giving their opening statements during Wade Wilson's trial. And that was that Diane and Kristine had exactly 3 things in common. They were both killed on October 7th, 2019. They were both strangled to death. And they were both last seen with Wade Wilson. When Kristine Melton was killed, she was 35 years old. She lived in a duplex in Florida with her cat because she was like a cat mom and was also said to just be a nice girl, a quiet girl, and a beautiful girl, even studying aesthetics and makeup at the Salon Professional Academy, and was said to just be like a fun person and a really good friend. She was the type of friend that you would have in your life for years, like her and her, I believe, best friend. They seem to be best friends to me. Her name's Stephanie, which we're going to talk about her more later. They had literally been friends since high school. They met when they were just 15 years old. And I don't know about you, but I know a lot of friendships that start at that age don't tend to last because that age girl can be a little bit vicious. But that wasn't Kristine. They stayed friends all this time. They moved across the country together. They lived in Colorado together for a while before moving together to Cape Coral or Corral. I bet it's Coral because Florida, Coral, the ocean. Okay. And they were both waitresses at the same place. And this was Duffy's Sports Bar and Grill, I believe was the name. It was Duffy's for sure. That I know. Which that must have been really cool to work so closely. First off, to grow up with your best friend for such a long time, to stay friends and to like go through all those phases of life together and then be able to work together later. I think that I would really love to do that with my best friend is what I'm getting at. But in talking about Kristine, I could tell you all these little things that I read, all these little facts about her, but I feel like what her family said after she was killed is going to give you the best picture of who she is personally. They put out a statement after she was killed saying that they wanted to shed some light on their beautiful girl. And they said of Kristine, in part, and I quote, "Before Monday, Kristine was not a victim. She was not a news story. She was the glue that held our family and friend group together. She was stunning, but her beauty paled by her character. Above all, Kristine was loyal. She had been our support since the day she was born. She was a protector and loved fiercely. She was wicked funny, beyond words funny. Her humor was dry and quick and witty, and anyone who's ever sat beside her knows that. She was adventurous. She loved traveling, the mountains and the beach. She was a beloved daughter, sister, cousin, friend, niece, and aunt, her favorite aunt amongst our children. Her absence leaves a space that can never be filled. She was a precious soul and an irreplaceable force. She was a once-in-a-lifetime person. Think of her that way. Please pray for us. Pray for the family of Diane Ruiz as we are living a nightmare that you cannot fathom." Now, Diane Ruiz was a 43-year-old mother of 2. She had a son and a daughter. And on October 7th, 2019, she left for work and never came home again. In addition to being a mother, she was also a fun and loving woman. She was engaged to be married at the time she was killed, and her fiancé, Scott, seemed gutted at her loss, saying that she was the light of his life. He said that they always had so much fun together. It didn't matter what he was doing. As long as he was doing it with Diane, he was enjoying himself. She was just said to be that person. She was the type of person who, even if you just met her, she would make you feel like you totally belonged. Diane was said to be a wonderful mother. Her son said that she was hardworking and caring, and it broke my heart because in interviews when he was talking about his mother, when he was on the stand talking about his mother, he was stuttering and choking up because he said he was just devastated by her loss and that it was from trauma, and that was what was making it so he couldn't speak about her. Diane was also said to be very structured, very reliable. She had a job where she worked, and it was the Moose Lodge, and she had worked there for 5 years and had never missed a day. And all the time she had worked there. So that's why when she did not show up for her morning shift on October 7th, 2019, people noticed. So basically what happened here when it came to Diane is horrible. This entire case is horrible, but we're starting by talking about Diane and her disappearance. So basically what happened is she walked to work this day. She worked as a bartender at the Moose Lodge, and it was pretty close to her house. I think her fiance said it was maybe 2 blocks away. And usually she would get a ride. She'd get a ride from a neighbor of hers who I guess did Uber, and they would give her a ride. But on this day, the neighbor wasn't available. So since it was so close by, she's like, I'm just going to walk to work. So she left. She's wearing a light blue shirt and jeans, and she's carrying this purse of hers that was brand new. She had just bought it like a week before because apparently she was a girl who just loved her purses, which cannot relate. I literally don't own one purse, and I'm realizing now in life that I need one and not just a diaper bag / backpack. Now, I'm mentioning what she was wearing in her purse specifically because it matters. It's how people knew that she was missing. So very shortly after Diane disappeared, her purse was found on the side of the road near an elementary school. And the person who found it, because it was in such close proximity to the school, thought that maybe, I don't know, like a teacher who worked there had lost it, or a parent, a mother, a father, a person dropping off a kid might have dropped this purse. So it was returned to the school. So the people at the school, they go through it and they realize that Diane doesn't belong to anybody who works there. It doesn't belong to anybody who is a parent of a kid who goes there. So the police were contacted. And meanwhile, Diane's son is at home. He's a little bit older. I think he was a teenager when this happened. And the Moose Lodge, the job, calls and is like, hey, like, your mom's supposed to be here and she isn't. And immediately he knew something was wrong because this place was so close to their home. It should have only taken her like 15 minutes to get there, and she never got there. Her son said that this whole time was a blur, that he was just frantically reaching out to people trying to see if anybody had heard from her, and nobody had. And he had been trying to call, Diane's fiance, Scott, but Scott was at work. I forget what he did, but it was something where like he would basically leave his phone in his vehicle when he would work, and he would just check it like on his breaks. So he didn't even find out till midday that something was wrong, that there was a problem, but he went and he checked his phone and he saw all of these missed calls. So he immediately left work and went home. And it was then when he got home that he found out that she really was missing, and that like literally her purse was found abandoned in front of a school. Now, Diane's body wouldn't be discovered for days. I think she was found 4 days later, which had to just be so horrific for her family to not know where she was for 4 days. And they just couldn't understand how this could have happened. She lived so close to her job. It was only like a 15-minute walk again. And it was like early in the morning. So what could have happened in that short amount of time? I mean, they had a candlelight vigil at the Moose Lodge where nearly 100 people showed up just hoping and praying for her safe return, having no idea that she had been dead the entire time and was the second woman killed in the same day, because at the same time that police are showing up at Diane's house with her purse, police are also going over to Kristine Melton's. They're looking for her because it was just hours after Diane went missing that police responded to Kristine's home on Tudor Drive because her car was found abandoned at Mateo Graphics, where Wade left it with blood in it. So now we're back to where we began, with us being at Mateo's Graphics, where Wade showed up shirtless and covered in blood and took off on foot, leaving behind the car with blood inside of it that we now know belonged to Kristine Melton. So as I'm sure you can imagine, at this point, searches for Wade began. But while some officers started to search for Wade, some stayed at Mateo's Graphics in case he came back later in the day, and other officers started looking for Kristine Melton because at this point, they don't know that she's dead. They go to her home, they go to her work, and they can find nothing. They can't find her at all. So they end up getting a hold of her emergency contact. I'm assuming this was her emergency contact at work, though it was not specified, but what other emergency contact could it have been? So they contact the emergency contact, and this was her cousin Samantha. And Samantha did not know where Kristine was, but she referred the police to Kristine's friend Stephanie, who I mentioned in the beginning, because Kristine and Stephanie were together the night before. So police reach out to Stephanie, and she's already a little uncomfortable at this point because she had been trying to get a hold of Kristine all that morning and wasn't able to, and just thought she was kind of sleeping off the night before. But now she's getting a call from police asking if she knows where her friend is. And she doesn't. She tells him she does not, but she is able to give them some very helpful information. Stephanie told police that the night before, her and Kristine had gone out to have fun together like friends do, and they had gone to this place called the Buddha, which was like a bar where they played live music, things like that. So they were there. They were having drinks. They were chilling, not killing, socializing, meeting new people. And one of the people they met, one specifically that is of note in this case, was a young man who introduced himself as JR. But Shyamalan twist, this was not JR. This was Wade Wilson. And not this one. Not this Wade Wilson. This Wade Wilson. JR, or Wade Wilson, jumped in front of Stephanie as they were walking by and was like, hey, who's your friend? So Stephanie, being like a good wingman, got Kristine and was like, hey, Kristine, this guy wants to meet you. Which I have to imagine she so regrets, but she had no way to know that something like this would happen. She just thought this guy that she thought would be Kristine's type, because he's not a bad physically looking dude. I mean, now maybe so much, but at the time he was a normal looking dude, tall, dark hair, dark eyes. So she's like, hey, he wants to meet you. That's what you do. So anyways, Wade and Kristine spent a lot of that night together, with Kristine telling Stephanie that she thought he was cute. She liked his dimple. She liked that he was tall. She thought he was handsome. And they seemed to really hit it off. And it wasn't just them, though. It was Wade and Kristine, and then Stephanie and this guy, Jason, were hanging out, though I don't believe that there was any, like, attraction between the two of them. He was just kind of there. And the girls actually thought that Jason was Wade's friend, because they were hanging out by the time they were meeting at Buddha. The guys were together, the girls were together, but it turns out the guys met that night too. But at the time, the girls didn't know that. But that's not super important. The fact is, they're all hanging out. And by the time the bar closed, they decided that they wanted to hang out more. So they all headed to Jason's home, where apparently he lived with his mother, and she was not happy to have all these people showing up at her home after the bars were closing. So it's like after 2 a.m., all these people are showing up at the house. And she's not stoked, but regardless, they stay at Jason's house and they head to his bedroom, which I guess had a patio off of the bedroom. And from there, Jason and Stephanie went and sat outside while JR, Wade, and Kristine became, according to the prosecution, intimately acquainted in the bedroom. At the end of the night, Stephanie, Kristine, and Wade leave Jason's house with... The reasoning for it has been said differently by different people. Basically, Jason and like the girls are saying it was getting late and like, you just need to leave. Like, I don't know all of you all that well. And it's like the middle of the night and it's morning time and you got to go. And then later Wade will say that this guy was a little bit weird and a little bit sketchy. So we wanted to get away from him because he's trying to like put the blame on somebody else for what he did. But the point is, the girls and Wade left, and there's this whole situation with his car where he didn't know how to drive it, and it made the girls very uncomfortable, and they were freaked out by this guy who couldn't seem to operate his vehicle, who had been drinking, trying to drive them home. So they end up taking an Uber, and when they got back to Kristine's home, because that's where they went, they were so relieved. They were so relieved to get home safe after a night of drinking with people you don't know that well, which I feel like is very relatable for many times in my life. And I just find that her being so relieved to be home safe makes this whole situation of what happened to her that much sadder. Now, by the time they got back to Kristine's house, the morning had crept in and Stephanie needed to get home. So she told Kristine, like, I got to get home. It's Monday morning now. I got a kid. I got to get off to school. I guess she had left her son with her mom, so the kid's grandma, so she could have a night out. Moms do be needing nights out sometimes because, again, they went out Sunday night. It's Monday. Got to get kid to school. Got to get to work. So she tells Kristine that she has to go and asks her, like, are you cool? Is everything good? And Kristine tells her, like, yeah, you can go. Everything is fine. Later, Stephanie was so sad talking about this because, of course, as she felt her friend was in danger, she wouldn't have left her alone with this guy she didn't know very well. But I have to imagine she didn't feel like they were strangers at this point, right? They spent the whole night together. They had been intimate together. There were no red flags, period. And Stephanie said that if there had been any red flags, if Kristine had felt any sort of discomfort, she would have told her, like, oh, help me get this fucking guy out of my house before you leave. But she didn't. So she thought everything would be fine. And she told her, like, I'll talk to you tomorrow. But she never would talk to her again because sometime after, like shortly after Stephanie left, Wade Wilson beat and strangled Kristine to death. After she was dead, Wade wrapped her body like up in a bed sheet and tied it with articles of her own clothing before trying to move it from the bedroom where she was killed to actually try to take her out of the house. He wants to try to dispose of her body, but he quickly realizes that dead weight is heavy, that she was too heavy to move. And then now the sun was out. It was morning, so people may see him. So he decides to dip. He steals her phone, but also before he leaves, he uses her face ID to open her phone. And then he takes her phone and he steals her keys so that he can steal her car. He just left her in her apartment like that, tied up between the bedroom and the kitchen. And it's such a thought because I know that after police had called Stephanie to ask her if she knew where Kristine was and letting her know that they had found her car abandoned in the place that they had found it, that she freaked out, that she had reached out to Samantha, and that Stephanie, Samantha's husband, I think, and another cousin had all rushed over to that apartment. And when they got there, they just found caution tape on the door because the police had already found her. But just imagine if they had found her in that way. It's just like, but thankfully they didn't. Instead, they all headed to Kristine's mom's house and waited there until they got the news that Kristine was gone and that she had been killed. And Wade was the one who killed her. And then he just dipped and he took her car and he took her phone. And you know why he needed to open her phone? He had a phone call to make. And who do you think he was calling? His girlfriend. Okay. Her name was Melissa. He had a girlfriend and he had actually been at the Buddha, the bar, with her that night before, meeting Kristine and flirting with Kristine and leaving with Kristine. I guess they were there together and they ended up getting in some sort of fight because he wanted to go to some stranger's house and she didn't want to go. So he just dipped and made her think that he left. And I'm just like, what the fuck, Wade? I know we can't expect much from you because you're a murderer, but bro, come on. But anyways, he gets a hold of her and at the time she is at a spa. So they agreed to meet there. And it's 8:45 in the morning when he arrives and he is being very erratic. He gets there in Kristine's car and literally tries to kidnap his girlfriend. He tries to rip her into the car and she fights him back. She's like, no, I'm not going with you. I'm literally at my place of business right now. That's not happening. And he isn't taking no for an answer. He jumps out of the car so fast. He doesn't even put the car in park. The car rolls back and hits another car. And he's trying to grab her and physically force her into the vehicle to take her. And I guess she's very small. She's 5 to 100 pounds. So she's fighting back, trying to be tiny but mighty. But the problem is he's bigger than her. It's been reported that he's 6'5", 6'6", at the time was 230 pounds, though now I think he weighs more than that because it seems like he's beefed up a bit in prison. And he is he's a lot stronger than her, man. And he attacks her. He punches her in the face, causing her to bleed. He bites her ear. He grabbed her by the throat and slammed her into a wall and held her there. And keep in mind that this is before 9 a.m., dude. And he's not letting her leave. And by this time, people are seeing this. It's like a business where this is happening. It's like a plaza. So other people are there. Other businesses are there. And some woman, being super brave, actually went out and confronted Wade, which made it so that Melissa could get away from him. So honestly, this woman probably saved her life. And man, I truly cannot imagine how terrifying this must have been for her because apparently this was not the first time he had been violent with her. He was said to have been abusive with her throughout their entire relationship, but always made excuses for it, that he was on drugs, he was drinking, he was bipolar, and he was unmedicated. They had only been together 6 months at this point, with most of the time that they'd been together, he was in and out of jail, but she stuck by his side and she stayed with him even though she was scared of him. And I guess this day she was equally scared of him and she really believed that this day he was going to kill her. She said that during this altercation, as he held her, he kept trying to reach for something in his pants, saying over and over, I'm going to kill you right now. I'm going to kill you right now. And she believed him. She said that as he attacked her, all she could think about was how that day was her son's 15th birthday. And she was going to die before she even got a chance to call and wish him happy birthday. And she said that's the only thing you think of as a mom, how, quote, you're going to leave your child and how badly that would mess him up for the rest of his life. But luckily she was able to get away. She suffered from road rash, some scraped knees, some cut up elbows, and 2 busted lips, but she was alive. And you know what's ridiculous about this? What's ridiculous about Wade Wilson? There's a lot of ridiculous things about Wade Wilson, don't get me wrong. I went in deep with learning about this guy, and I just think he sucks. But one of the things is that even after this, even after what he did to her this day, what he did to her throughout their relationship, what he did to Diane and to Kristine, he still tried from behind bars to win Melissa back. He called her, he told her how she was the best thing ever But this time she was not swayed. She said that he is very narcissistic and impulsive, doing what he wants when he wants, and that he has always gotten by with his looks and his charms, but said she doesn't see him like that now because after that attack on her that day, she said that his eyes are dark holes, saying specifically that he had, quote, dark serial killer eyes, and added that there was no reasoning with him because there is literally nothing behind those eyes. Now, despite everything he did do to her, we know in this situation she was lucky because we know what he could have done based on what else he had done that morning. But what he did do in this situation is get back into Kristine's car and take off, buying himself a little more time because, of course, when the police showed up at the spa, because they were called, there was an altercation, police were called, he was gone by the time they got there. He had now decided to drive over to Cape Coral or Corral, and I still think it's Coral, and he crossed the bridge to get there. And it was while driving around in the neighborhoods over there that he ran into 43-year-old Diane Ruiz, who was just minding her own goddamn business. Now, somehow Wade was able to get Diane into the car. He says that she did so willingly, that he just, that she wanted to ride, so she got in the car. But I don't know if I believe that. One, like, her work was super close. Why would she do that? Two, we know that he tried to kidnap Melissa, and just the condition of her body after she was found, and the fact that there was blood found in the car and her purse found on the side of the road. It seems to me that maybe he took her by force. But what we do know is that she ended up in the car, and that almost immediately after getting into the car, he strangled her while he drove, one hand on the wheel and one hand on her neck. She was then taken to an area off of Northeast 4th Avenue where her body was dumped near, I believe, a Sam's Club. Now, police actually ended up having a witness to Diane's disposal by somebody who didn't even realize that that's what they were witnessing at first. I guess there was a building behind the lot where she was found, and that morning there was a man and his woman, I don't know what she was to him, but they were having breakfast, and he looked out the window and he sees this black car driving back and forth. And at the time they're like, that's weird, but didn't think much of it until later they saw crime scene tape in that area and realized that they had witnessed something bad. And it was incredibly bad. And this is very, very fucked up. But based on the condition of her body and based on what Wade Wilson said he did, what this man was witnessing was Wade driving back and forth over Diane's body. He said when he went to take her out to dispose of her, she was still breathing. So he took her out and he ran her over and over and over until he made her body, this is what he said, look like spaghetti. And then he took her and he put her in that lot, in that field under bushes and shrubs and left. And man, that's where she would lay for days until the way they actually found her is that they saw a single vulture circling over the area and they were able to recover her. But before that, when she was missing, the only real lead they had is that on a surveillance camera in her neighborhood, they had seen a black Nissan. And eventually that Nissan was linked to Kristine and then to Wade Wilson. So they knew that he was involved. Now, after Wade left Diane in that lot, he actually heads to Joe's Crab Shack, which seems totally random, but it turns out he had been talking to Melissa over the phone and she had agreed to meet him there. And when I first read that, I was like, no, Melissa, girl, don't. But turns out that morning when the police showed up after he assaulted her, she agreed to work with them to try to get him to a location so he could be arrested. So he had no idea he was being led into a trap, which snaps for Melissa from a girl who can't snap, has never been able to snap. So he gets there, and before he even gets out of his car, he is approached by police. The officer, sorry, I saw the surveillance and I was like, he could have parked a little closer, but they park in front of him to try to block him in, but there's plenty of room on each side. And they go up and they start questioning him, and he plays dumb, acts like he has no idea why they're there. But quickly within being questioned, he gets spooked and he decides, I'm just going to bail. And since he was still in his car and there was so much room on either side, this was very easy for him to do. So he just drives around, goes out of the parking lot and heads to the business of an acquaintance that he knew. And this was Mateo Graphics. So after leaving Mateo Graphics, this is where we're at in the timeline now, he runs into a neighborhood behind the business and ends up going to the home of this young couple named Kent and Fanny, which are they not the cutest names you've ever heard of in your life? I was like, Fanny? Oh my God, that's so cute. But he goes into their house. And luckily, this is the house of a couple who had just left the state. They narrowly missed running into him because they would have ran into him because he ended up breaking into their house through, I believe it was a bathroom window, and just helping himself to their home. And apparently it wasn't just them either. So this woman came out with a report after he was arrested, right? And she said that she had been gone that morning. She went out to yoga. And when she got home, she realized that somebody was in her home. And this was Wade Wilson. She saw him. She tells him to get out of her house and noticed that he just looked like he had had a really rough night. But she told him to leave, and luckily he did. She was alone, so I'm really glad. Well, I don't know if she was totally alone, but I'm just glad that she's okay. So he leaves, and when he does, she takes a picture of his license plate just in case. And I guess he saw her, and he's like, "Why'd you do that?" She's like, "'Cause I don't know who the fuck you are." But luckily, he did leave. And she said that when she had gone to yoga, she had left her car unlocked. And when she went in there after to see if everything was there, because this guy had just been on her property, she found that he had pissed in one of her cup holders. And I know that that doesn't really have to do with the story, but I felt like you needed to know it because it's so nasty, because he's nasty. And also because this happened the same day that the murders were committed. So I only imagine what could have happened, especially considering the fact that she said that after he was arrested, he somehow found out her information and had been contacting her from jail, which is terrifying. But anyways, he is in that young couple's home. He took some food, some drinks, some clothes. He used their phone and he called his dad. Well, his biological dad, Steven, but we're going to get more into that a bit later. And he told him he needed help. He needed to get out of town and needing his dad to call him an Uber. Well, that was the last call. There were actually 2 calls to his dad before that. So let's get into this whole situation. So it turns out the first time that Wade had called his dad was probably after he killed Kristine. And he called his dad and said that he needed his help because he had done something bad that he couldn't take back, and said it was related to an argument with his girlfriend. And basically that he just needed help. But at this time, Steven was at work and was like, "Listen, I can't have this conversation with you. Call me back around dinner time, and if you still need help, I'll see what I can do to help you." Now, between Wade's first and second call to his father had been reached out to by police because police are investigating him. They're looking into who he is as a person, and they're reaching out to people that he may get in contact with so that they can try and find him. So they had reached out to his dad and been like, "Hey, if he contacts you, let us know because we are trying to track him down." But I don't believe they gave him specifics of what they were looking for him for. So when Wade finally did call him back the second time around dinner time, his dad knew that the police were looking for him. So likely something bad had happened, and Wade confirmed for him on this phone call that that was true. Steven says that Wade told him that 2 people were gone and were never coming back and that he was a killer. And Steven says at this point he wasn't taking Wade seriously and just told him to call back later, which just makes me wonder so much because if he truly didn't take him seriously, like what was a normal conversation for Wade Wilson with his father that this wouldn't stand out as unusual and that you would think it was a joke? Like there just had to have been so many red flags with this guy. Anyways, his dad told him to call back later that evening, so he did at about 10 p.m. And it's at this point that he's more specific with his father about what he did, and now he's believing him. He said that he had met a girl in a bar, that they had hit off, that they had hung out a bit, went home together, and that at some point she fell asleep, and that after she fell asleep, he attacked her in her sleep, climbing on top of her and strangling her to death, saying specifically of this quote, "I choked that bitch." He told his father that after he killed her, he stayed in her house for a while before wrapping her up and planning to dispose of her body by putting her in her own trunk and taking off, but that she was way too heavy and rigor mortis had set in, so he just stole her car and he left. He then told Steven about Diane, saying that he had been driving Kristine's car down the street when he saw her walking, so he pulled over to ask her for directions. He said that he was able to then get her into the car where he proceeded to strangle her, and he referred to her as a fighter. He then drove around in the car with her body looking for a place to dispose of her, and when he finally found one, he took her out of the car, and that's when he realized that she was still alive. So he ran her over and over. And Steven said that when Wade was telling him all this information, he seemed excited and like proud about what he did. And like he was happy to tell these stories. Now, I cannot imagine being this man and hearing this. He's hearing this come out of the mouth of his own kid. And not just him. He had it on speaker. So it's him and his wife listening to him say all of this. And I guess initially he was conflicted. He didn't want to turn him into police. He wanted to be able to help him. But as he listened to him tell the story of what he did, and not just the way he did it, but the way he was bragging about it, the way he was excited about it. And he seemed like he was telling his dad this because he wanted his dad to be excited with him. But he wasn't, obviously, because normal people don't get excited about murdering women. Steven said he just sat there and he started thinking about all the people in his life he cared about, you know, his mom, his woman, like the women in his life that Wade could have done this to. And he decided that he was going to turn him in because he didn't want to give him an opportunity to do this to anyone else. So with that said, during this convo, while Wade is speaking to his dad, Wade's dad's wife, yes, Steven's wife, is talking to the detective and giving the detective all the information that Wade is giving Steven. So Steven plays along with him and is like, listen, okay, I'm going to help you. Give me the address where you're at and I'll send over an Uber. So Wade gives him the address and instead of an Uber, he sends over the police. So the house was surrounded and police did their due diligence. They reached out to the owners of the house, finding out, one, did you give him permission to be there? And they were like, absolutely no. Who the fuck's that? And two, do we have permission to enter to get him out? And they were like, oh, fuck yeah, please get him out. So this is all happening. And meanwhile, Wade is still on the phone with his dad while this is all happening. And his dad's like, listen, just don't be stupid. Don't get yourself killed. And Wade actually listened to him and ended up coming out of the house and being arrested. And initially, he was arrested for the assault on his girlfriend. That's what this is all about. But while he was in jail being held, while they were getting all the evidence, they were then able to charge him with the murders of Kristine and Diane. And man, initially when he was asked by police why he killed Kristine, he was like, you know, I just wanted to. And when he was asked, okay, why did you kill Diane? He was like, might as well. Why not? I had already killed one. Now, people, as I'm sure you can imagine, were shocked to hear what happened here. Like, it took a little bit of time for Diane to be found and for them to connect it to Wade. But once they connected the two cases and connected to Wade and saw just how, like, random this whole thing was, people had a lot of trouble believing somebody could just do something like this without provocation, right? And the people who loved these women were so just shocked. One of Kristine's friends said that when she got the news, she just fell to her knees because she couldn't imagine ever like learning something like this about a friend in her life. And man, it was so heartbreaking for Diane's family. Her fiance said that he had just been waiting for her to walk back through that door. And now he knew that it was never going to happen. And he just loved her so much. And she loved him. He said the last text that he received from her was her just saying that she loved him. And he was worried, and he is worried, that he's never going to be able to love like that again. And he said that Wade is just a monster. And you'll hear that several times throughout this case. Most people who talk about him refer to him as just that, a monster. But he disagrees. Just so you know, he disagrees with that statement, saying actually of his status as a monster, and I quote, "I'm not a monster. I'm not a saint either by any means. I've made bad decisions in the past, of course. Everybody has. But here's the thing, Wade. Yes, everybody has made mistakes. That is true. But most people's mistakes don't involve murdering women and leaving kids without a mother and mothers without their daughters. You know what I mean? And a lot of people are kind of the mind that you should be tortured just like Kristine and Diane were. Especially because, dude, it just seems like this guy was like a rabid dog. Sorry, not sorry, but with his history, what he did specifically to these women and his reaction to it, I just feel like he's the kind of person that we don't really need on this crazy little planet that we call home, you know? He is clearly a very violent man who has an issue with women. We can see that specifically in what he did to Kristine and Diane. We can see that in what he did do and then what he attempted to do to Melissa. And it turns out this wasn't just like a bad day for him, because this is kind of the thing that he had a history of doing. There's a woman who came out after like he was arrested, when all this came out, that he had met in Palm Beach, Florida, I believe, and her name was Kelly. And the two had met. The two had started dating. They got into a relationship. And when she met him, she thought she had won the lottery because he was tall and hot and dark and handsome or whatever and charismatic. And she said the beginning of their relationship, she would describe it as perfect. She said that he was smart and funny and her family liked him and he would like help her mom do yard work. But then he would also punch holes through her back door and threaten to kill her dogs, which is quite a hard left turn there, in my opinion. And then from there, it escalated very quickly. So it was February of 2019. I believe it was actually one day before her birthday when Wade finally decided to put his hands on her. And she said of this, and I quote, "He told me he could either knock me out and tie me to a tree, or he could tie me up in my car. So obviously I didn't want him to hit my face, but he ended up hitting me in the face anyway, splitting my lip open. He tied me up in the back of my car, covered me with laundry so no one could see me, and ended up driving me all the way to the Keys." She said that during this trip to the Keys, which trip to the Keys sounds like a vacation, but it was not, during this hellish ordeal that she had to go through, he also raped her along the way. And she said during this entire time that she spent with him, she was sure she was going to die. But she didn't. She didn't die. She was able to get out of this situation and she went to police and she reported it. She was afraid of him. She was afraid of what he would do and she was afraid he would go on to do this to somebody else and that he may escalate and actually kill someone. Now, what's super sad here is the prosecutors ended up dropping her case due to a lack of evidence because when they went to Wade to, question him about this, he denied it and there was no physical evidence or witnesses. So they were like, I guess we're going to do nothing. And it's like, did you think that if you went and asked this man, hey, did you tie up and rape and beat your girlfriend, that he was just going to say yes? Yes, I did actually. Is that a problem? Of course he wasn't. Who would admit to that? But anyways, he was just let go. And from there, she started posting about her story with Wade on social media, on Facebook specifically, because she wanted people to know and she wanted to warn people. She said she wanted people to know there were two sides of him, that he could literally be the sweetest guy that you've ever met in your entire life, but the other side of him was pure monster. She even said that the first time Wade hit his next girlfriend, that this girlfriend reached out to Kelly to tell her what happened and get support. And that's when Kelly told her, you need to leave him, and told her all about what he did to her and said that, he's going to go on and he's going to kill somebody because he's literally a disgusting monster. So I just think it's safe to say he wasn't a cool guy. He wasn't a good guy. And in addition to the more serious things he did have other smaller things in his past too, like stealing from an ex who I actually think that was Kelly, and pawning her stuff and skipping court dates. And I guess since 2010, records show that he was arrested more than 20 times for charges like fraud, trespassing, burglary, and assault. But for me, the biggest red flags are the ones that I talked about more thoroughly, which is the violence against women. Now he's in jail. We're back to that. He's in jail at this point, and it takes a long time for trial to begin for a variety of reasons. There was COVID, which was a big one, right? Because he's arrested in 2019. 2020 really fucked us all pretty hard. And there was also the fact that he seemed to not be able to keep an attorney. He switched attorneys so many times. One attorney filed a motion wanting to be relieved as counsel, saying that the relationship between them and Wade had deteriorated so much that it could not be mended. And with an attorney, I don't know if you know this, they can't just quit. They have to submit a motion to ask the judge and give reasons why they want to dip on a client. So that happened. And it just seemed like he was overall difficult to deal with because several of his attorneys, he went through them quite a bit. And one, I think, actually even died. But we do have a couple of interesting things that happened while he was in jail awaiting trial. Because there was so much time in between him being arrested and him being tried, he had the time to do some stuff. Okay, so first, let's discuss the elephant in the room. The big, ugly, stupid-looking elephant. And that is the tattoos that he has now. Because, listen, I'm not against tattoos. I have tattoos. My husband literally tattoos for a living. But he has made some questionable choices when ornamenting his meat suit, right? Most notably... Okay, wait, back up. When he was first arrested, the most controversial tattoo that I'd say that he had was under his chin. He had the words, quote, "bred for war." But since being arrested, he has gone on to add all of those ones that are all over his face. He didn't have those at the time that he murdered Kristine and Diane. This is stuff that he's chosen to get while awaiting trial. And he's gotten some very interesting ones, most notably the swastika on his cheek, which is pretty fucking stupid, in my opinion, and like quite a choice. And he literally has "why so serious" with like "ha ha ha" down his cheek, which is a choice. Not a choice I would make, but definitely a choice. Now, because of the tattoos he got, his attorney was worried that he might not be able to get an impartial jury because they would see him and definitely judge a book by its cover. So one of his attorneys went as far as filing a motion to get him permission to wear makeup, to like cover his tattoos because he has so many on his face and they didn't want him to be prejudiced. And he won this motion. But when he decided to go to trial, well, he didn't decide to go to trial. When he went to trial, he decided, like, fuck it, I'm just going to show my tattoos anyway, and didn't put the makeup on. And then continued to go on and get more and more tattoos while awaiting trial, which is just like, I just feel like that's a choice. He just makes choices, man. That's what I can say. Because I feel like if you're trying to like, because he pled not guilty. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. You would think that he wouldn't do that if he wanted to be found not guilty, but he did. And he had so many and so much going on that his attorney, when going through jury selection, had to ask the jury, is like, is there anything about my client's physical appearance that would make you think that he's a dick? Direct quote. It's just such a silly question that his attorney had to ask because of the choices he made, when this attorney had a lot more pressing questions to ask of potential jurors. Like, quote, do you have any personal or moral or religious opposition to the death penalty? Because, yeah, they were going after the death penalty with him. Now, the next thing that happened in jail with Wade is that another prisoner that he was in jail with, this was a guy named Tristan Gendrum, I believe, asked Wade if he would be willing to help him by killing the mother of his child so his domestic abuse charges would be dropped. Now, Wade was in jail at the time that this request was made, so obviously he couldn't personally do it because his hands were tied. You know what I mean? But the guy was like, listen, I just know you're the guy that I can ask because maybe you have a crew on the outside who could take care of this for me. This guy went as far as giving Wade her name, her like security code, her garage code. And Wade, just so you know, in an interview, he made sure to let people know this happened and made sure to let people know that he decided not to do this because though he didn't know her at all, she was a human being and deserved to live, and even went on to be a witness in this guy's trial because obviously you can't do that, and he got into some troubles. So the next interesting thing that Wade did while awaiting trial is he actually tried to escape jail. He and another prisoner, his name was Joseph Katz, they just tried to literally like break a window and just like jump out and escape prison, which is like not the most discreet way to try to escape prison. I will say he definitely did not take a page from the book of Andy Dufresne. But that wasn't going to be the only way he tried to get out of jail. That was the illegal way he tried. But he also tried to file a motion to get his case like dismissed. In the motion, he asked the judge to drop all charges against him due to a violation of attorney-client privilege. In the motion, he claimed that the public defender's case files were hacked in April of 2021 and argued that the hack put confidential statements as part of the public domain, thereby making the case unviable for prosecution. Now, I guess this did happen. It was addressed. They came out and they were like, yes, there was a malware intrusion, but we have people on it. There's like some cybersecurity team who has looked into it and restored it. And basically everything is fine. And the judge agreed. So his charges were not dropped. So since he was in jail and he was not getting out, he figured the best thing that he could do with his time was to reach out to news stations. And one of them was NBC2, I believe. And he reached out to them several times, offering to do interviews, and sent them like a buttload of letters. Now, something about these letters that was interesting to me is I guess he would not refer to Diane and Kristine by name in these letters, but he did refer to another unrelated woman by name. This was Lauren DeMolo, who has been missing since 2020, and Wade claims that her disappearance is all part of this huge conspiracy that's being covered up and that he is going to expose it. But anyways, back to the interviews. He was telling these news stations that he had some information, he had some information to give and that these interviews would be, quote, career making, which, spoiler alert, I listened to them and they were anything but this is what he was saying. And the thing was, he was like, I will give you this information, but you gotta pay me. So he made this offer to NBC2 and they reportedly turned it down initially because, quote, checkbook journalism is really frowned upon and unethical and like not cool. So they say that they told him no thank you and that he like threatened to take his interview elsewhere. Now, I didn't see it reported exactly how they came to this agreement, because though he does do other interviews, he did do an interview with NBC2, and they say they never paid him, but the interview did happen. During this interview, he said he was not guilty of these 2 murders, and then he gave his side of the story. He says he had met Kristine, yes, and he had been intimate with Kristine, but that he had not killed Kristine. He had stayed at her house with her after the night out of drinking, but he said that the next day he actually asked her if he could borrow her car and her phone, and that she said yes, because he needed to drive her car to his car to get gas, because remember, I don't know if I mentioned this, but when they left with Jason that night to go to Jason's house, they tried to take his car. I did mention this, and that it had run out of gas, so he left it over by Jason's house, so he needed to go get like gas in a gas can, take it to his car, fill it with gas, and so she let him borrow her car. He says he then went and looked for his car, but he couldn't find it. He couldn't really remember where he left it parked, and he didn't really remember where Jason lived, so he's like, might as well just go back to Kristine's. But then when he went to go back to Kristine's, he didn't really remember where she lived either, so he just drove around for hours looking for either his car or Kristine's home. He said during this time that he was driving around in Kristine's car, he did see Diane. Yes, he did see her. Yes, he spoke to her. He asked her for directions, and that she asked him for a ride. So that would explain why her DNA was in the car. He drove her to the bus stop because she was going to take a bus to work, which is weird considering she literally lived 2.5 blocks from her home. She lives 2.5 blocks from her home. Her home was 2.5 blocks from where she worked, so she wouldn't need to take a bus to get there. So that's where he says he left her. And then he said, not being able to find Kristine's house, he decided to drive to the business of one of his acquaintances. This was Mateo Graphics, because it's one of the few places that he actually knew how to get to. And by the way, he says he doesn't know why Joshua would say that he was like shirtless and bloody, because that definitely wasn't the case, even though they literally had him on video in this state. He said that he was wearing a shirt, and if there was any blood on him, which he doubts there was, it was his blood, because, he's real buff, okay? So he does push-ups on asphalt, and sometimes he cuts his hands and he bleeds. This is his story. And he was very adamant that he was not guilty, and said specifically of this, quote, "I did not commit those murders. I'm innocent." He then tried to explain all the evidence the prosecution had against him, because they had a ton. They had DNA evidence. They had the DNA evidence on the pants, the shirt, and the bathing suit top that was used to tie Kristine up after she was killed. And the DNA matched to both Kristine and Wade. They had Wade's DNA in Kristine's car, because remember, he was driving her car around. In the car, they also had both Kristine and Diane's phone. They had the fact that both of these phones were used to call Wade's girlfriend. And then they had the confession that he gave to police after he was arrested, though he did say that this particular confession was coerced. He said specifically that he was being set up for these murders because he was part of an organized crime ring that took part in human trafficking, and that he was trying to shut that down. So they were trying to frame him for these murders. He said he was told if he didn't confess, his family would be hurt, his kids would be hurt, which I haven't seen if he actually has kids, but the idea of this man having children is appalling to me. But the point is, he's saying the confession was coerced, but he did confess. So we were able to hear, or at least read in his own words, what he said he did and how he said he killed these women. And he didn't just confess to police. We know he confessed to his father, Stephen, and he also confessed to his girlfriend, Melissa, who, by the way, sometimes he calls Mia or Mila. So if you see that in reporting, that's who he's referring to. He literally told her that, yes, he had killed Kristine and Diane, but he had been under the influence of drugs when he did it. Now, drugs is something I wondered about when I first started reading about this case. I wondered if maybe he was under the influence when he did something like that, because it's just hard to believe somebody would just do something like this randomly, but we know people do. But he said no. In the interview, he said no, that he did not do drugs, and that he never told Melissa that he did murder the girls or that he did drugs, that just came out of nowhere. Though it is worth mentioning that Stephanie, Kristine's friend that she had been out with that night, did say on the stand that yes, drugs were being used that night, that Jason, Wade, and Kristine were doing cocaine, and that they were all smoking weed and drinking. Though she did say that though they had done drugs, it was a small amount, just like a party amount, and that everybody was acting normal and everything was chill. It wasn't anything that would make anybody worry that they were too messed up, basically. Now, it was across the board thought that it was pretty dumb for him to give these interviews, because like I listen to him and he just sounds dumb. He sounds dumb, and you can tell that he's lying and that he's trying to make things up as he goes, and he refuses to answer certain things because there is no way to make it make sense with what he's saying. And it's just all very convenient for him to say that this is the way things happen, because neither of these women are here to answer for it, right? To actually say if it's true. This was just seen as the acts of a desperate man who did not have the advice of an attorney, which is just so wild to me, because he went through so many attorneys. And I'm sure that at least one of them, if they knew that he was doing this, would tell him not to do it. But I mean, can we really be surprised that he would go on to do it anyway? Because he had the option to cover his tattoos and he chose not to do that. So he obviously isn't listening to the people who he should be listening to. Now, I don't actually know if I mentioned this, but at the time that Wade committed these murders, he was only 25 years old. So by the time he went to trial, he was 30 because of all the delays. And I believe I mentioned this, but he pled not guilty. He was held without bond, and they were going after the death penalty, and they were not going to make any deals with him. Like at one point during the hearing, the defense was even like, hey, we just wanted to kind of see like what was going on with maybe making a deal, maybe getting a reduced charge. Any thoughts on that? And the prosecution literally said, quote, absolutely not. Now, at the time Wade was arrested, the state law dictated that in order for somebody to be eligible for the death penalty, the jury, all 12 members, had to unanimously agree that that's what the punishments should be. But in the time he waited in jail to go to trial, the law actually changed, and now only 8 jurors had to agree for the death penalty. So 4 could be like, no, I'm not into that. But if 8 said yes, he could be eligible for it. Now, of course, Wade and his attorney filed a motion arguing that because the law was one way when Wade was arrested, he should be subject to that, and that all 12 jurors should have to agree for him as well. But the judge actually disagreed, which I found to be interesting, because usually I feel like a lot of times we see that like if somebody is arrested that they would get the original sentencing, but maybe it has to do, I don't know what it has to do with. The point is the judge disagreed. So only 8 jurors would have to agree that he deserves the death penalty for him to be eligible for it. And I think the judge makes the final decision on if he gets it. But the point is that to be eligible, only 8 jurors had to agree. So with that, the trial finally began. And this was on June 3rd, 2024, which is the month and the year that I am filming this, which is years after the actual murders were committed. The prosecution told the jury that they'd be shown all the evidence plus photos and videos and testimony, and that the only verdict that would be acceptable would be guilty of the first-degree premeditated murders of Kristine and Diane, and also the other charges of grand theft of Kristine's car, the battery of Melissa, breaking into that young couple's home and like eating all their food. The prosecution had a lot of evidence to present. They had a strong opening statement, and they presented nearly 30 witnesses, several of which were very difficult to watch, to be honest, because I did watch the trial in real time. One of the things that was difficult to watch was the testimony of Dr. Coyne, who was the medical examiner who described the injuries that both women sustained. Kristine Melton was 35 years old when she was killed by Wade Wilson, and she was found in her home in South Cape on the floor between her bedroom and the kitchen, wrapped in bedding and tied with pieces of her own clothing. Her face was black and blue, her nails were broken, and she had marks around her neck because she was killed by strangulation. Diane Ruiz was 43 years old and a mother of 2 when she was killed by Wade Wilson. She was found on an empty lot, just left outside like trash, with a broken nose. Her hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage was broken. She had multiple rib fractures in the front and back of her body from when she was run over, and she was killed by a combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this was very difficult for everyone in the courtroom to hear about, especially because it was very clinical, which, I mean, he is, a medical examiner. You would expect that, but it's very weird to hear that described in such a clinical term, I guess. It was just weird for me. Diane's fiance testified, and it was very hard to watch because you could tell from the moment he got on the stand that he was just wrecked. Because imagine being this man. Imagine the love of your life leaves for work one day and never comes home because of a random act of violence. And it was so heartbreaking to hear him talk, because he said that morning she had texted him, and that she had texted him because she thought that he didn't kiss her goodbye before he left. And when he talked about this, he just got so choked up. And honestly, I almost cried. I could cry now. It's just such a relatable thing. It's something that I've done a bunch of times where I text my husband, I'm like, you didn't even kiss me. And he's like, I absolutely did. And in Scott's situation, he had kissed her too, but she thought that he had. And that was like one of the last interactions he had with her. And then Stephanie, poor Stephanie, to be Kristine's best friend for years, to have met when they were 15 years old and move across the country from Illinois to Florida together, and to literally be with her the night that she was killed and to leave her that morning with her killer. And now she's here testifying at her murder trial. She told them all about that night, about learning that Kristine was missing and then dead, and about giving her statement to police. She also, it's sad, she had to identify a tattoo that Kristine had on her leg, and they showed her a photo from after Kristine was dead, and she was clearly affected and cried in that moment. And again, I watched this when it was happening by video, and I swear you see Wade Wilson smirk when she cries. And speaking of that night, for anybody who might be curious about that guy, Jason, because, Wade does try to kind of imply that Jason could be responsible because when they were all hanging out at his house, he and the girls got weirded out by him, and that's why they left. Well, police did end up tracking him down, and they talked to him, they interviewed him, they took his DNA and everything, and he was, ruled out as being responsible, in case you're wondering, which I'm sure you're not, because it's so clearly Wade. But he just said that that night he met Wade for the first time, just like the girls, and just thought he was like a cool guy. But clearly Wade Wilson is not a cool guy. But anyways, Wade's biological dad, Steven, also testified. And as soon as he got on the stand, I was taken back by how young he looked, because he looks very young. And it turns out the reason, comparatively to Wade, right? And it turns out the reason is because when he found out he was going to be a father, he was 14 or 15 years old. Can't imagine what a wild ride that was. And I guess the mother was even a year younger than him. So they were actual babies having babies, which does happen. But in this situation, they felt ill-equipped to take care of a child. So Wade ended up being adopted by a couple that went to church with Wade's maternal grandparents, I believe. This was Candy and Steve Wilson. They adopted him, and he was raised alongside two sisters. So anyways, I guess once Wade Wilson turned 18 years old, he decided that he wanted to reach out to his biological parents, which is how he ended up talking to his father, Steven. And I guess they developed a good relationship. They didn't see each other in person very much, but they talked on the phone all the time. They would go periods where they would talk almost every day, and then there'd be a long time where they wouldn't talk. They talk like every so often, but they had a relationship. And Steven said that the relationship mostly became Wade calling him when he needed help, because Wade had been in prison before, and according to Steven, was a struggling drug addict. So he said mostly what he helped him with was financials when he needed money. So that's likely why Wade called him when he needed to get out of town, when he needed money for a bus ticket or a train or a plane ticket or an Uber. This is why he had called Steven for this, because Steven had been the person who would help him. So now Steven's here on the stand telling the jury all about this and about those three phone calls that he made, where he confessed to his father what he did. And the confession was very jarring, if you recall, because he told his father that he choked Kristine when she was asleep, that he attacked her in her sleep, and that he had just picked up Diane and just immediately choked her, and that she was still alive, remember? And then he took her out of the car and put her on the ground and ran her over and over until she looked like spaghetti. This was very powerful for the jury to hear that he said this, and especially that he said this and was excited about it and bragging about it. Now, as I've demonstrated here, the prosecution had a lot that they brought forward to the trial. So I'm sure you're now wondering, what did the defense have to say? What did the defense have to say for everything that we did? And that was not much. Not much. They called no witnesses and didn't even have an opening statement. The only thing that the defense really did is on the second day of, well, I'm sure they did other things, but the only notable things to me that they did is on the second day of trial, they tried to have a mistrial happen, because I guess some body cam footage was shown, and one of the statements that the police officer said while the footage was being shown could have prejudiced the jury. So he's like, mistrial, can we do that? And the judge was like, no, we cannot. The only other thing they really did was to file a motion requesting a psychological evaluation, saying that it was, quote, crucial for mitigating purposes, end quote, which really tells me that their goal here wasn't to find him not guilty, because they knew that they couldn't do it, but to get him basically to save him from the death penalty, because that's what mitigating circumstances are, is to affect the sentence, not the outcome of guilty or non-guilty. But it was worth noting that the defense attorney also said that they couldn't afford to do this, so they needed like taxpayer dollars to pay for this evaluation, which I don't know if it happened. It probably, I'm assuming that it will for his sentencing. But anyways, during closing arguments, the prosecution said that Wade murdered these women for the sake of killing, adding specifically, quote, "Strangulation is the epitome of life slipping through someone's hands." They said that he was the lion and these women were his prey. And then they added specifically, and I quote, "It only takes 2 minutes. He doesn't get scratched. He doesn't get hurt. They don't yell. They're quiet. They can't get away even if they wanted to. He's too strong." Because remember, he's a big guy. They also said that Wade admitted that if he had gotten Melissa into that car that day and had taken her away, he would have killed her too. But there were too many people there. So instead, he beat her until blood spattered all over her face. They also pointed out that Wade did not care at all. Well, he didn't have remorse. He definitely cared, but he cared in a positive way. He was still bragging about what he did to police days later. I think they said 3 days later, he was still bragging about it. And that the only thing he cared about was getting a burger and fries in exchange for giving his, having the conversation with police about what he did. So this is what he's worrying about. While Diane Ruiz, quote, lay in a field, bugs eating her face, making her unrecognizable, to the point that she had to be identified by tattoos on her back, because she had a tattoo of a dragon and a rose and the rings that she wore on her fingers. The prosecution said that this case was nothing more than, quote, a graphic, vulgar display of power, and that Wade himself had admitted that if he had not been caught, he would have done this again. Now the defense, they were like, listen, we're not gonna try and say he didn't do this, because come on. But it wasn't depraved. It wasn't premeditated. He was whacked out of his mind on drugs. So if you could please find him guilty of second-degree murder and not first-degree murder, that would be great. You'd really be doing me a solid. Now, the prosecution was able to have the final word after the defense made that statement. And they said that using the fact that he was on drugs as an excuse for murdering these women was insulting. And said what this case came down to was Wade Wilson not respecting women, not respecting life itself. And then went on to repeat what Wade had told police after he was arrested. And this was, quote, "I choked her out until she couldn't breathe anymore. I came across my mind to murder. Just kill, kill, kill." And Wade, he never testified on his own behalf. He never said a word. Now, the trial went surprisingly fast, with both the prosecution and the defense resting on just, I believe it was the second day of trial, which was June 11th, 2024, I believe, with deliberations to start quickly thereafter. After just over 2 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with their verdict, and they had found Wade Wilson guilty of all the charges against him, including the premeditated murders of both Kristine and Diane. Now, Wade was said to have no real reaction, and I did watch it when it happened, that he had no real reaction to this verdict, though he was seen as, quote, swallowing back some of his tears after learning that he was guilty, and then he was handcuffed and he was led away while the family and friends of Diane and Kristine cried and hugged each other and just accepted what had just happened. So that's where we are at now. The next step is the penalty phase, and the prosecution is going after the death penalty, but will of course have him evaluated by a doctor prior to presenting their case for that, because, that's a whole separate thing. The defense is of course going to try to get him life in prison instead, or at least a lesser sentence. They don't want him put to death, and they will have their own doctors there to fight for this cause. Now, all of this is actually set to begin on June 20th, 2024, which, if my schedule goes according to plan, because I have a lot of craziness in my life right now, which I'm actually going to put at the end of this video so that those of you who want to stick around for it will know what's going on, because it's going to affect the channel a little bit. But what was I saying? Oh, that's all supposed to start on June 20th. And if my schedule goes according to plan, That was yesterday, so we should know soon what Wade gets in terms of sentencing, though I do imagine that that phase of the trial is going to take a little bit of time because sentencing somebody to death cannot and should not be taken lightly. Of course, once I do find out what the sentencing is going to be, I will find a way to let you guys know, whether it be in like a short or a pinned comment or like an update video, which speaking of which, I have a lot of case updates I need to bring to you guys. So will you let me know how you would like that to be delivered to you? Would you like 1 or 2 videos where I put the updates all in one place? Because I went back and I looked into the cases that I had left kind of open-ended, ones that we hadn't had full resolution on, and several of them actually do have updates. So let me know how you'd like me to get that information to you. I was thinking of filming 1 video, but there's like 10 updates. So probably 2 videos where I put the updates so that you know what happened in those cases, but let me know what you would like to see. But I am very curious to see what Wade gets in terms of a punishment. I'm curious to see what comes out after he is evaluated by these doctors, what was in his past and in his upbringing to make him into whatever the fuck he is, right? Because you know what? He can say he's not a monster all he wants. But spoiler alert, to me, he is. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Kristine Melton and Diane Ruiz at the hands of Wade Wilson. I hope that you found my telling of this to be informative, and I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Kristine and Diane with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day. I actually have 2 now, and these are them. 1. Do you believe if Wade Wilson had not been caught when he was, that he would have gone on to kill more women? Now, to elaborate on the question, I do think he would. I don't usually answer the questions of the day myself, I don't think, but I'm going to today. I think he would have. I think he was very dangerous. I think that he's a very interesting, he's not interesting, fuck him, but it's interesting in the ways that he is dangerous because everyone describes him as being so charming, so nice, and it just seems very scary that somebody could be those 2 things at once, especially because he is also conventionally good looking, right? It's kind of that Bundy effect, which I never saw what people saw in Bundy, right? Like the people are like, oh, he was so attractive, he could lure people in. But when it comes to Wade Wilson, I could see prior to the face of tattoos that could have been the case, right? He is a lot of people's type with the tall and the dark and the handsome and the eyes and the charismatic nature. And that goes very far, and humor. And then to know that he was this dark person underneath, I think he could have got more women to come to him in that way. And I find that to be very scary. Not so much now with the stupid face full of tattoos and also the likely being in jail for the rest of his life. But that leads me to the second question. That was this. Why do you think he chose not to cover his tattoos when he had the option to do so? Like, doesn't it seem like maybe he wanted to stay in jail? I can't see that he actually would want to, but it's like, why else, if you wanted to be found not guilty, which was what he pled, why would you do that? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because that one really perplexes me. Anyways, guys, please let me know down below what case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, but whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it. So if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out new videos every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. Speaking of my social media, this leads me into that little thing I was going to save till the end. If you follow me on Instagram, you may already know, but I'm moving. Very suddenly, very out of nowhere. It came very, very fast. I have to move in 2 weeks, so I have not had a chance to pre-film it all like I did like when I was on maternity leave and things like that. So there may be a lull in videos. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that I can film one more before we leave in the next 2 weeks, even though I have to pack like crazy because we were not prepared for this. But the thing is, we are moving. We're moving into a new place that has an extra bedroom. So I should have a filming spot that is designated for filming, which is great. And it's going to take a little bit to get it together because it's also hardwood floors, which if you don't film, that presents a whole new problem with audio and editing. I was going to do a separate video on this, but I'm just, I just want to tell you guys about it because I don't know if I'm going to have time. The whole point is I may have to put out a compilation in place of a normal video. And if so, just watch it, put it on in the background, just let it be played because that'll at least push it into the algorithm. Because if you get kicked out of the algorithm because you don't upload, it's very hard to get back in and the channel could die is what it basically comes down to. But I'm hoping it doesn't even come to that, and that I can just get new videos up. That's the goal. But that's what's going on. Also, I have bangs, and I promise you, in the video, they look real stupid, but in person, they actually look cute. There's something with the angle that makes it just like look very much like a bowl cut, but it is cuter in person. So those are the updates, moving and bangs. Hopefully no lull in video, but perhaps one, but hopefully not. And I hope that you guys stick around for it. Yeah. Where's your cheese? Okay. And now with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video.